We are live.
Okay, terrific. Well, good morning. I'd like to call the remote meeting of the Senate Committee on Energy and Environment to order. It's Tuesday, November 16th, 2021 and 8 a.m. Well, Omar, will you start with a roll call of the members? And in case you all forgot, because it's been a while, please unmute yourself, state that you are present, and state whether you are participating by phone or video.
Senator Dembrow,
Senator Dembrow is here by Teams video.
Senator Robinson,
Robinson's here by video.
Vice Chair Finley,
Senator Finley present by video.
Chair Lemer.
And Leber is present by video. So thank you all for joining us for our first meeting of this interim. I want to welcome you all. I'm very excited to be taking over the chair spot from a very able chair of our Lee Byer. So he has set many things in motion, and I'm certainly happy to sort of take that over as we go forward here. We've got kind of a packed agenda today with a lot of really interesting items on it. But the very first thing that we have to do is we have to adopt the committee rules. And my very able vice chair, I believe, has a motion.
I do. Chair Lever, I move to adopt the proposed committee rules dated November 16th, 2021.
Terrific. Senator Finley moves to adopt the proposed committee rules dated November 16th, 2021. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, let's call the roll.
Senator Dembrow,
Dembrow votes aye.
Senator Robinson,
Robinson votes aye.
Vice Chair Finley,
Finley votes aye.
Chair Lemer.
And Leber votes aye. The motion passes and the rules are adopted. All right, terrific. Well, now we're going to open up some informational setting of the agenda. The agenda has been posted, and it's quite a long agenda, but the first item that we are going to talk about is the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. So is Corey Ann Wind available? Let's see, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Terrific.
Yep.
All right, please take it
Can you see
over. We can.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Leber, Vice Chair Finley, and committee members. For the record, my name is Corey Ann Wind, and I work for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and I'm the Clean Fuels Program Manager. Thank you for inviting me today to provide you with an update of the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. So I am pleased to report, oh, next slide, please. So I'm pleased to report that from the beginning of the Clean Fuels Program, when we began implementing this in 2016, that over the first 5 years of this program, nearly 6 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions have been avoided by switching to lower carbon transportation fuels. So this has been accomplished by transitioning to ethanol, biodiesel, renewable natural gas, renewable propane, and electricity. And it has displaced over 1 billion gallons of gasoline and diesel over that period of time. Every year, the amount of biofuels that have been blended into our gas and diesel have increased, and those biofuels are getting cleaner and cleaner, reducing not only greenhouse gases throughout the life cycle of the transportation fuels, but by reducing tailpipe air pollutants and toxics as well. And with the number of electric vehicles growing rapidly in the state, even more gasoline and diesel will be displaced by clean burning electricity. Our state's electric utilities receive clean fuels credits on behalf of their EV owning residential customers. And in turn, they have sold those credits and invested almost $20 million in projects to promote additional transportation electrification as well. These include community grants to purchase electric vehicles, and Oregon's first electric school buses, funding for chargers in many rural parts of the state, and supporting education and outreach efforts. The revenue from selling clean fuels credits can also be used as valuable match to federal grants, such as those in the upcoming infrastructure package. Okay, next slide. So by design, the Clean Fuels Program is a market-based program that allows the fuel providers to comply with the regulation in several different cost-effective ways. The market has grown to approximately $200 million in 2021, and with about $94 million worth of credits being traded through our online system to date. So with only California and Oregon having this incentive to clean up its transportation fuels, it sends a really strong signal to the clean fuels producers worldwide to bring their innovative products to our markets. Based on conservative estimates, the average cost to comply with the program in 2020 was about 3 to 5 cents per gallon of gasoline or diesel. And in many cases, the cost of the cleaner fuels is cheaper than the fossil fuels they replace because of the credits that are generated from the program. Next slide, please. So the strength of the market will undoubtedly increase as DEQ begins a formal rulemaking next month. As you know, Governor Brown issued Executive Order 2004 last March. Among several policy directives to DEQ and the Environmental Quality Commission in this order, Governor Brown included adjustments to the Clean Fuels Program goals and timeline. So as you can see here, beyond the currently adopted 10% reduction in average carbon intensity by 2025, the order's policy direction is for the EQC and DEQ to take actions to expand the program to achieve at least 20% reductions by 2030 and 25% reductions by 2035. And this is from a baseline year of 2015. DEQ will work with its stakeholders to consider future goals and any modifications to the program that might support achievement of those standards. So the proposed rulemaking will begin in December, and we'll work through with stakeholders through the rest of this year and into the middle of next year. And we're planned to be presented to the Environmental Quality Commission for consideration in the fall of 2022. So that completes my brief update on the program for you today, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much. I believe Senator Finley has a question.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of emissions reductions in the transportation sector, there appears to be a complete picture for all reductions taking place. Do you have it broken down by attribution to existing programs? As an example, the E10 and B5 mandates, the electric vehicle mandates. Do you have it broken down by specific sectors so we could see the effectiveness of each? There are numbers from previous years that show the actual number of the Clean Fuels Program is much different. So I'd just like to be able to see a specific breakdown by individual program. You have that available?
Senate Vice Chair Finley and excuse me, Chair Lemer. Unfortunately, I don't have it broken down by program, by regulation. I think if you're talking about whether it's the renewable fuel standard mandate or the zero emission vehicle mandate that we have at DEQ, I don't have it broken down by regulation. What I do have it broken down by is by different fuel types. So I can estimate for you, the amount of E10, the amount of B5, overall blend rates of, say, biodiesel and renewable diesel that exceed those numbers and those kinds of figures. We could follow up with you on that.
I'd appreciate it. Follow up?
Follow up?
Thank you. And thank you so much for that. I guess what I believe if a true goal is always measurable and obtainable, If not, it's just a good wish list to do. So the Clean Fuels Program that was described and sold and bought off on in 2015 had specific mandates and targets. And I guess I'd like to see a scorecard on that to see this is what we're supposed to do. Now that we're 4 or 5 years into it, it would be nice to actually see how we've done. And I guess I'm more just as concerned with the overlap of the E10 and B5 mandates and the others as a reference to the Clean Fuels Program as it went through to see if we're just stacking things on top of each other for the sake of stacking, or we're actually making continued reductions by individual sector.
Yes, Vice Chair Finley and Chair Lemer. No, I think that's a really good comment. Over the first 5 years of the program, we do have annual standards. We have exceeded those standards on an annual basis, which means that there's basically more credits that are generated than the higher carbon fuels that have been imported. And so there is a growing bank of credit. So we are over compliance right now. I see the renewable fuel standards and the blending mandate and the requirements, whatnot, as complementary to the Clean Fuels Program. I think what we've seen is that because of the market nature of the Clean Fuels Program, more of those fuels and the cleaner of those fuels come to the state. So for example, we do have an E10 mandate, and so the ethanol needs to be 10% of the gasoline, but the ethanol part of it has become cleaner and cleaner. So it's approximately 20% cleaner than it was when we started in 2015. Like say, for example, with electric vehicles, the fact that they come to the state because of the zero emission vehicle mandates. But what the Clean Fuels Program then provides is money that have been going to charger companies and to the electric utilities to invest in the charging infrastructure that we need to complement what those vehicles are, right? So it creates revenue and it creates value throughout the supply chain.
Thank you. One last follow-up, Madam Chair, then I'll quit.
Yes, follow-up.
So thank you. The Climate Protection Program, was the Climate Protection Program forecast reviewed by the Clean Fuels Advisory Committee? I'm nervous about the fact that we've got all these, each one of these programs has an advisory committee, and I don't know how much interaction is between the two and referencing and whether each committee is taking full credit for all of these savings when actually they're probably more attributed to a different program. So I guess I want to make sure there's full autonomy, but there's close coordination between all of them. So we're going to meet our target. Hopefully that'll be identified and we can lay them out. So thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Dembrow.
Thanks, Chair Lemer. I just as a sort of aside, I do want to point out that, as the fuel stocks are becoming cleaner and cleaner and the tailpipe emissions are becoming cleaner and cleaner, there's obviously benefits to the environment, but there's also benefits to public health, especially in the, more urban areas. And that really is something to point out. But my question is, as you know, after many years of effort, our neighbors to the north, the legislature passed a Clean Fuels Program last year. Do you have a sense of how that's going to affect the market? Are you thinking about that, planning for that in terms of potential impact here in Oregon?
Yes, Senator Dembrow and Chair Lemer. So yes, we've been working very closely with the state of Washington, the Department of Washington Ecology, on the development of their program. And likewise, we have for several years, like with the West Coast states, with California as well. Our studies indicate that there is just large volumes of cleaner fuels that are available. This is not just, state by state, it's regional, it's national, it's global. And so, there are billions of gallons of biofuels and, lots of clean electricity that can be used as a transportation fuel. Additionally, one of the requirements that the legislature does have on the Clean Fuels Program is that we do an annual forecast to ensure that we have adequate supply of the clean fuels to actually achieve the clean fuels program standards. And so part of that annual exercise is to ensure that, our program remains viable. And we do, again, work really closely with both partners in Washington, California to make sure that, the regional supply is adequate for all of our very aggressive standards.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wind. I really appreciate that. Is there any further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you again for your presentation. We're going to move on to the second item on our agenda, which is the Oregon Global Warming Commission's Working and Natural Lands proposal. We've got 3 people who are slated to talk with us. Let's see, I've got Kathy McDonald, David Ford, Maya Buchanan. I don't know who's going first, but please go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and begin your presentation. I don't think we can hear you yet. Is that Ms. McDonald? Are you up first? Okay. I think is your microphone off or on? Hold on. Okay, try that now. Are you still muted? Yeah. Okay, let's try it again and see if we can't get sound, because that always makes a presentation better when we can hear you.
Are you clicking the kind of icon to the right of your name there, or is there a bar on the top, Kathy?
Let's see.
It looks like you're unmuted, but it's not. I still can't hear you.
It looks like it says that she's offline. If I do the external, I'm wondering if you should. Can you leave, Ms. McDonald, and then rejoin us and see if that helps? Still can't hear you.
We can also, there's a phone number that I can email you quick. Oh, she's gone. I'll just do it just in case.
Yeah.
If this doesn't work, Chair, you could have her call in.
Yeah, we'll do.
And I'll shoot her the phone number very quickly.
Okay. I see our other 2 presenters are here. Let's see if we can get Ms. McDonald up and running.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yay! All right. Okay. All right. So
I really apologize.
no, it's not a problem. Thank you so much. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Lemer, Vice Chair Finley. For the record, my name is Catherine McDonald. I'm the chair of the Oregon Global Warming Commission, and I'm pleased to be joined here today with the Oregon Global Warming Commissioner Ford and our senior policy advisor from the Oregon Department of Energy, Maya Buchanan. Thank you so much for the invitation to present the proposal that we developed this last year for natural working land sequestration and storage goal. Today, next slide, please. Today, we're just going to have time to give you a very high level overview of why it's important that we develop this proposal, the process we used to develop it, key elements of the proposal, and then how you can help us advance this important work. We have posted the executive summary and full proposal on with the meeting materials if you would like to dig in on this in a deeper way. Next slide, please. In 2018, the International Panel on Climate Change produced 2 really important reports. One talking about the impacts and the opportunities associated with natural and working lands for addressing climate change, and then the Global Warming 1.5 degrees centigrade report, which demonstrated that we wouldn't be able to avoid the worst impacts of climate change without thinking about and investing in strategies that improve sequestration in our natural and working lands. Next slide, please. Recognize, in addition, there's research was developed in 2017, published in 2017, that showed that nature can be up to 1/3 of the solution needed by 2030 to mitigate climate change. And in addition to the climate benefits of a number of the practices that can be taken to increase sequestration in the land sector, there are numerous co-benefits for communities and for producers. So a lot of great benefits. Next slide, please. Recognizing the importance of the land sector, Governor Brown directed the Oregon Global Warming Commission to work with partner agencies to develop a proposal for adoption of state goals for increasing sequestration and storage in Oregon's natural working lands. And so we set out last summer to start to work on that a year ago last summer. Maya?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Leber, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Maya Buchanan, Senior Climate Policy Analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy. Next slide, please. To develop the proposal, the Commission developed an inclusive and transparent process that provided opportunities for broad public engagement across the state and collaboration with other boards and commissions. The Commission engaged tribes, federal agencies, stakeholders, and technical experts. Engagement also focused on identifying additional societal benefits or co-benefits resulting from actions to achieve the goals. Next slide, please. In total, the Commission engaged over more than 1,000 individuals through public comment, surveys, and focus group discussions. Input ranged from recommendations on the goal and specific strategies to general considerations for designing the policy, practice, and investment frameworks. The Commission discussed goal development and received public input at 10 different Commission meetings. And then a targeted survey was used to gather information on current practices related to carbon sequestration and also incentives, opportunities, and barriers. The targeted survey was distributed to Oregon tribes, agricultural and forest landowners and land managers, and also to technical assistance providers in agriculture and forest interest groups, conservation organizations, and environmental justice groups. And the Commission received a total of 737 responses from that survey. There were also focus group discussions that were convened to better understand the practices, the incentives, and the policy options to help achieve a carbon sequestration goal. There were 96 individuals that participated in 8 different focus group discussions, and each of those groups had 8 to 15 participants. These groups represented conservation organizations, forestry, environmental justice, and landowner and manager interest groups. And the remaining 4 were organized by region. So there was a group on the coast, Willamette Valley, Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, and also a cross-sectional group of agricultural landowners, technical assistance providers, land trusts, and nonprofit organizations. Finally, a more general outreach survey was posted on the Commission's website from January to March 2021, and that had a total of 122 individuals who responded to at least one of the 6 broad narrative style questions. So this provided an opportunity to provide input on the barriers to increase the opportunities and barriers of increasing carbon sequestration on natural working lands. Thank you.
Next slide, please. From all of this great input, the Commission developed a vision. Can I have the next slide, please? Developed a vision for what we hope to accomplish with the natural and working lands proposal. And there are 2 important elements to this. The first is that we must recognize that we have to create a robust but resilient carbon sink. We both have to consider the impacts of climate change, including the increased wildfire risk as well as the opportunities we have for increased carbon sequestration in our natural and working lands. So we want to make sure we're considering both sides of that equation to set a good goal. And then the second element is that we want to do this in a way that's positive for our communities and our economy, as well as our quality of life and equity. So those are all important elements of how we crafted both the goal and recommendations. Next slide, please. In developing the goal, we considered the input that we got from stakeholders and affected parties and used those to help shape the goals. I won't read all of them to you, but they are all reflected in how we set the goal and how we propose that the goal be managed over time. Next slide, please. The outcome-based goal was developed based on a review of literature and studies that have been done to help us assess what the potential is for increasing sequestration across natural and working lands. And this looked at coastal wetlands or blue carbon ecosystems, our forests, and our agricultural and range lands. And we set a goal of an additional 5 million metric tons per year by 2030 and an additional 9.5 million metric tons per year by 2050. So that's how we set the goal. We reflected, again, how we would manage it based on the input that we got from stakeholders and affected parties. To support achieving the outcome-based goal, we propose to develop 2 additional sets of goals. Next slide. The first is an activity-based metric that will help us set the baseline for the sequestration that we've had over the last 10 years. And then the second is a community impact metric that will help us make sure we're achieving those economic and community and equity-based outcomes that we hope to achieve with programs. Next slide, please. David?
Good morning. For the record, my name is David Ford. I'm a commissioner on the Oregon Global Warming Commission, senior fellow at the American Forest Foundation, and reside in Dundee, Oregon, where I'm looking out and seeing the sun for the first time in a while. So I'm excited about that. Well, we heard from Maya about the robust process used to gather input from the public on a range of stakeholders, during the development of a report. And this input included a perspective on the strategies that we were developing. The slide before you includes some examples of input received that guided our strategy development. I just want to highlight a few of the many bullets that you see on this slide. And the input stressed a few key things. We should ensure that processes are equitable and collaborative, that we be informed by science, including traditional ecological knowledge, that we should evaluate and eliminate disincentives and recognize and reward good practices. And we should align strategies with other state and federal and tribal needs and goals. And finally, we should focus on incentives with judicious and strategic improvements in regulation. Next slide, please. Now, the Commission developed 4 strategies for increasing sequestration in Oregon's natural and working lands, and these strategies reflect the public input received during the development of our report. Now, the first strategy is to position the state to leverage federal lands and investments in climate-smart natural and working land practices. Now, with the federal lands making up 53% of Oregon's natural and working lands, it's critical to work with our federal land managing agencies to ensure that their land use and management plans and programs support achieving Oregon's sequestration goal. In addition, it's important to recognize that 1/3 of Oregon's forest land is in private ownership. And with President Biden signing the bipartisan infrastructure bill yesterday, some funding will become available for natural and working lands, including forest wildfire and resiliency work on both public and private lands. The second strategy is to investigate options to create a sustained source of state funding to increase sequestration in natural and working lands. We can achieve some increases in sequestration by including a climate mitigation lens in existing natural and working land programs. With dedicated funding for natural climate solutions, the state will be better positioned to leverage federal funds, private investments, and philanthropic funding. Having predictable funding sources empowers the state to establish long-term climate priorities to conserve, restore, and manage our natural and working lands that will help communities mitigate and adapt to climate change. Our third strategy is to fund and direct the agencies to take actions to advance natural and working land strategies. Advancing the natural and working land proposals will require added and dedicated capacity within the natural resource agencies, as well as in the Oregon Global Warming Commission. And our final strategy is to invest in improvements to Oregon's natural and working lands inventory. Technical experts recommended the state advocate for inventory improvements at the federal level, invest in research to improve state-specific sequestration rates, and where needed, address gaps in priority federal improvements, especially where the improvements would benefit multiple priority outcomes for Oregon. Next slide, please. Now, there are specific details in the Commission's report for each recommended strategy. But just as one example, Strategy 3 includes 5 elements and many sub-elements. These include enhance and maintain Oregon's statewide land use planning program. Here we recommend that the legislature fund and direct the Department of Land Conservation and Development to conduct an analysis of Oregon's statewide planning goals, planning guidance and tools, and other assistance the agencies provide to local governments to determine how the statewide planning goals and their implementation and support mechanisms should be enhanced to best facilitate the protection and restoration of natural and working lands to increase sequestration. We recommend establishing a comprehensive climate smart agriculture program, including funding the Oregon or the Agriculture Heritage Program. And related to forests, we recommend supporting the implementation of climate smart forest practices. By far, the greatest potential for increasing carbon sequestration in Oregon is associated with the management of Oregon's forest and the wood products they produce. With that in mind, the legislature should invest in expanding urban tree canopies, complete an all-lands strategic plan for incentivizing climate smart forestry, complete a strategic plan for expanding reforestation capacity, expand forest resiliency treatments, and expand programs to assist private agriculture and forest landowners. Further, we recommend greater protection and restoration of carbon-rich, tidally influenced coastal ecosystems. And we recommend the legislature fund a workforce and economic development study. Let me conclude by offering some Commission's recommendations for the 2022 session. First, establish and require updates to natural and working land sequestration goals. Second, give agencies the authority to accept federal funds from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and other funding mechanisms from the federal government. And we hope through the resilience or reconciliation bill that's now before Congress, which would offer a significant amount of money for investments in natural and working lands. Third, fund agency and the Oregon Global Warming Commission capacity to improve the inventory, establish activity and community impact metrics, track progress towards goals, and implement the recommendations contained in the Commission's report. 4, fund an analysis of the workforce needs and economic benefits of implementing the natural and working land recommendations. 5, fund a strategic plan for expanding Oregon's reforestation infrastructure. And this is critically important due to all the significant wildfires that have occurred in the last number of years. And finally, we are recommending that you codify the Forest Accord recommendation changes to the Forest Practices Act that were just reached by both the timber industry and the environmental community with the leadership of Governor Brown. We thank you for your attention and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you, can we put that slide back up? I believe we didn't see the last slide that had all the recommendations on it. I'd like to show that to everyone, and we can ask some questions while this slide is up. Thank you so much. I see that Senator Finley has a question. Let's just keep this slide up for a second.
Thank you, Chair Leber, and thank you, Ms. McDonald, for your presentation. You know, my commission meeting yesterday, and I had it. It was kind of sobering at times. One thing that strikes me is when you talk about natural working lands, is there are millions of acres in Oregon that are encroached in the east side of the state. You know, with aging and mature juniper, and it's excluded fine vegetation, and that is not, in my opinion, of a working land. I mean, I don't believe it. Has there been any study done on the sequestration capability of a juniper vegetation type stand in the desert?
Vice Chair Finley and Chair Leber, excuse me. There have been some studies of sequestration potential in shrub steppe habitats. Generally, that's more looking at how to maintain and expand bunchgrass and sagebrush. This kind of reflects that the importance of thinking about the resilience of the habitat while we think about carbon sequestration. And we may need to, in some places that have too much juniper, to cut juniper out. That might have a short-term impact on the amount of carbon that's stored in that system. But over the long run, if we can maintain really healthy shrub steppe ecosystems, that's going to be our best long-term strategy for both our communities, our economy, and for climate mitigation.
Thank you. Quick follow-up.
Follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one thing that I believe when you look, and I drive across the state on a regular basis, and I drive through some burn scars of tens of, not hundreds of thousands of acres, you know, and there's three travesties that occurred. The first is we let our forests and our natural lands get into a state that they were able to burn. The second is they burned. And the third is we didn't treat the scar, and we just left it to regenerate naturally. And I think that is probably the biggest tragedy of all, is that we didn't go in there and try to treat that and bring that to a working condition other than just a decaying condition. An example, if you come over Sandy Ann Pass, I mean, it's just depressing to look out there over the old biscuit fire, I believe it was, you know, and that's just allowed to not do anything. I think, is there any push to talk about regeneration and restoring the ecosystem to a better condition than just letting it decay and rot and regenerate itself?
I'll take a first pass at this, and then Commissioner Ford, you might want to add something. Vice Chair Finley, Chair Leber, there is a fair amount of literature out there that talks about the benefits of leaving natural stands after fire to recover on their own, and that and so there are trade-offs, and certainly there are a lot of opinions about the pros and cons. I would say that there's some need for additional discussion and additional digging into some of the science around the pros and cons of different approaches in lands that are managed for different outcomes. So that being said, one of the elements of the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure bill is a passage of the Replant Act, or the elements of the Replant Act, and that will take the limit off of the amount of funding that's available for federal land reforestation. And so I think there is some interesting dialogue and some good opportunities for us to think about how to best manage our federal lands. I think it will end up being that we will really want to take a close look at the purpose of the lands, how they're, what other co-benefits they provide, and as well as the climate mitigation outcomes.
Thank
And
you.
before we go on, Omar, you can go ahead and take down the slides and then turn it right back over to Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chair Leber and Vice Chair Finley, for your question. Yeah, Kathy, you've covered what I was going to say. The Replan Act, even if we did have agreement on where we wanted to reforest on the public base, the federal funds available to do such work has been so limited. There's so much backlog across the U.S. national forest system. And so as part of one of the roles that Kathy and I both play as we're members of the Forest Climate Working Group, which is a national coalition. And we strongly supported the Replan Act, which finally got passed and signed into law yesterday by President Biden, which will help alleviate some of this backlog. It still, however, doesn't get to the question of where should this be done. I think that's an ongoing dialogue that needs to occur because there are many opportunities, not just on public land, but I would also say on private land here in the state. Small private landowners don't often have the capacity to be able to replant, and we need to provide incentives to help them replant for those that are interested in doing so, because it isn't required under Oregon state law to do so, and we're missing some opportunity, I think.
Thank you. Senator Dembrow.
Thanks a lot, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank Kathy and David and Maya for coming forward. Kathy and David are both volunteer commissioners who spend a lot of their time on our behalf. I really appreciate it. And Senator Finley and I actually sit on the Global Warming Commission as well. It's as ex officio members. It's been traditional for the chair and the vice chair of this committee to sit on it. I'm sorry, Chair Leber, I'm not the chair, but when it was one committee together with the natural resources, I was, and that's when I started, and so could see this good work. You know, that committee has been split, and while the report that we got today is very timely for, you know, the large question of impact on environment and way to, you know, heal our environment, the specific recommendations in this report are probably going to be addressed in Senator Golden's committee, the Natural Resources, Wildfire Recovery Committee, and I think that there will be a committee bill there that will address some of these things. So it's really important that, you know, that we have this presentation today so that we're all thinking about what the right solutions are, you know, to get us on track. You know, I would say, you know, there is so much value in this report, just in terms of setting the broad agenda of what needs to be done in terms of taking advantage of our wonderful natural and working lands. But it's, you know, it's really deferring a lot of the work for the future, and it's setting up a process for that work to get done. You know, one of the things that, you know, really strikes me, and Senator Finley's line of questioning and the exchange that we just heard really, I think, reinforces that one of the first steps that we need to do is try to find some consensus around the science on how to proceed on some of these strategies, especially with respect to forestry. You know, I just had a conversation last week with somebody from the timber industry about the forest accords, the recently concluded forest practice accords. And you know, I asked that person, so how did this miracle occur that the parties actually came to an agreement? And what they said was that, you know, what was really critical was that the parties came to agreement on the science. That was kind of the first thing that happened. It took a while, but they did that. And then once that happened, the rest of the agreement sort of flowed from there. And I think that's really going to be critical here as well. I know one of the things that the report calls for is creation of a blue ribbon panel of scientists to look at some of these thorny issues. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. I'm very confident that if we can come to some agreement on the science, we have the infrastructure. We have this wonderful extension program at Oregon State University. We have the Watershed Enhancement Board. We have the ability to deploy strategies and make really good use of those dollars that we hope are going to come from DC, and also our own investments. We can do that work if we can come to agreement on what that work needs to be. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what you would like us to do in terms of authorizing such a panel and encouraging it.
Happy to do that. Senator Dembrow, Chair Lemer, I think there are two things that we're going to need to chart the path through some of the challenging issues around forest management and its respect to both resilience and mitigation. And I think it is a combination of trying to get the scientists together to inform that discussion, have the facts beneath us about what the forest lands are currently doing, what are the pros and cons of different strategies. The Oregon Department of Forestry is doing some work on different management scenarios over the coming years that will help evaluate options for forest management and what that might do. I think that will help settle some of the science, but I think we'll need to really focus a blue ribbon panel after that to both kind of solidify that our agreement on the science, but also to bring in the folks that understand what the potential impacts of different decisions are on our economy and our communities. And so I think it's similar to the Forest Accord. It's bring that science together with the folks that understand the potential pros and cons of different approaches on our economy, our communities, and the co-benefits that our forests produce. So in my mind, we should have something that's well coordinated with the Oregon Department of Forestry's work, and then is kind of a follow-on to that.
Thank you so much. Are there any further questions? Doesn't look like it. Thank you again for that presentation. We really appreciate you being here and for all of the many hours that you all are putting in on this. We really do appreciate that. That's true public service. So thank you. So we're going to move on to our, yes, you bet. We're going to move on to our next agenda item. It's the biennial zero emission vehicle report. We have Miss, is it Reichers?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. We have Miss Reichers from the Oregon Department of Energy. Go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Chair Lemer, Vice Chair Finley, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jessica Reichers. I manage the technology and policy team at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk about our new report. Next slide, please. For anyone who isn't familiar with ODO, we help provide data and analysis to the state to help all Oregonians make informed decisions about energy and participate in conversations about energy policy development. Next slide, please. So the Biennial Zero Emission Vehicle Report, which we affectionately call the BIZEV, was a 2019 legislative directive for ODO to develop this report in September of each odd-numbered year. And it was supposed to be on the overall state of transportation electrification in Oregon and the effects of this adoption on achieving the state's greenhouse gas goals. Next slide, please. Because the transportation sector is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in Oregon, and it is continuing to rise, the bill identified transportation electrification as a central policy option to address these emissions. And ODO was directed to develop this report using existing studies, market reports, polling data, and other publicly available information. The bill also identified 11 key reporting requirements to assess the state of zero emission vehicles in Oregon, and I'll be reviewing each of these as we go through the report findings. The bill established ZEV adoption targets, which I'm going to cover in a moment. The report went over commercially available or near commercially available zero emission vehicles, or ZEVs, as I will be calling them throughout this. These include vehicles that can be plugged in to charge a battery, including battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. These do not include standard hybrids, which have a battery that can assist the internal combustion engine, which improves the fuel efficiency, but it cannot be plugged in to charge the battery. Collectively, battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are often referred to as electric vehicles, or EVs. And zero emission vehicles also include fuel cell electric vehicles, also referred to as hydrogen vehicles. Believe me, we have a whole dictionary for these terms. There are currently no hydrogen vehicles operating on Oregon roads today. For this reason, you may hear the acronyms ZEV and EV used interchangeably in Oregon. However, it should be noted that all EVs are ZEVs, but not all ZEVs are EVs. Next slide. In Senate Bill 1044, it established ZEV adoption targets through 2035. The goals are ambitious, but necessary to achieve significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Next slide, please. And Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions targets are also a big lift. We are seeing some movement in other sectors toward lower emissions, but overall emissions in the transportation sector continue to rise. Next slide. The first reporting requirement for the BiZEV is to report on the sales figures and progress on ZEV targets. Next slide. So as of August, hot off the presses, we have 40,867 ZEVs registered in Oregon, with about 2/3 of those are battery electric only and 1/3 are plug-in hybrids. This is less than the targeted 50,000 registered ZEVs by 2020 that was established in Senate Bill 1044. And certainly COVID has played a role in this. We know, for instance, that there's a lag in the registration data because of the grace period that was allowed for re-registering vehicles in 2020 and in early 2021. And although we don't know for certain, it's likely these won't be fully caught up until at least the end of this year, possibly longer. But prior to COVID, we were anticipating that the goal would not be met until sometime in the first half of 2020. Yet there's still reason to be optimistic about ZEVs in Oregon, which I'll be highlighting throughout this presentation, starting with the fact that ZEVs now account for 1.2% of the entire light-duty fleet in Oregon. This is a major milestone, considering that only 10 years ago, ZEVs comprised only 0.02% of the fleet. And ZEV adoptions are poised to rise dramatically from here, although exactly when that inflection in mass adoption will occur is still a little uncertain. Senate Bill 1044 directed ODO to assess whether the state was on track to meet the targets established in the bill. Because of the uncertainty of when that inflection point is going to occur and the added uncertainties from the effects of COVID on the economy, ODO was not able to forecast ZEV registrations for 2025, 2030, or 2035. But next slide, please.
Ms. Reichers, prior to that, I believe Senator Finley has a question.
Great. Senator
I do. Thank you, Chair Lemer. Could you go back one slide, please? And did I misunderstand you? Is a plug-in hybrid a zero emissions vehicle?
Correct.
And because I thought I heard you say that it perhaps wasn't if it plugged in and it did an alternate fuel. So I guess I'm trying to say is are we taking credit for a zero emissions vehicle for a plug-in hybrid, but plug-in hybrid that still runs on both fuel systems if the plug-in goes out? So is it truly a zero emissions vehicle? Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but if it's produces emissions when it's not in the electric mode and it's on the combustible mode, it's not a ZEV. And so we've missed the goal by a lot more because there's like 12,000 of those on the road or registered. So because to me, the goal is measurable, obtainable, and reachable. And if it's not, then it's just an aspiration. And I believe these targets in House Bill 1044 was aspirations because they were not obtainable. and measurable. So I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that we're not trying to combine things too much, because a hybrid's not a ZEV if it has the ability for internal combustion.
Vice Chair Finley, Chair Leber, that is a question we wrestle with at the Oregon Department of Energy as well. You are correct. A plug-in hybrid electric vehicle also has a gasoline-powered engine in the vehicle. And one of the questions that we looked at was how often do people use the gasoline part of that vehicle compared to the battery? And data is pretty limited on that, especially anything that would be Oregon specific. But the studies that we're reading seem to indicate that there is a change toward using the battery more often. And the most recent study that we found talked about something like 70–75% of usage was off of the battery. So yes, plug-in hybrids don't have the fully working off of that battery, but at the same time, they're a very good transition vehicle for people who are concerned about range of their vehicle, and so play a valuable role, I think, in the transition within the transportation sector.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator Dembrow.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Let me jump in. I think Senator Finley raises a really good question. And just a sort of real world example from that amazing family, the Dembrow family. So, you know, as many of you know, I drive a Chevy Bolt, which with a B, which is an all electric. My daughter drives a Chevy Volt with a V, and that's a plug-in hybrid. And she, you know, most of her driving is around town, and she uses electricity for that, never has to worry. But she does like to take long trips occasionally. And so having the security of the gasoline engine is useful for her. So, you know, the great preponderance of her driving is actually on electric, and thus, you know, could be considered ZEV. But, you know, the gas is there as a backup. And I think that that's probably, you know, the rationale for a lot of people who drive plug-ins. So, you know, to that extent, you know, it is kind of, you know, what was described as a transitional vehicle, because, you know, until that time, when we have lots and lots and lots of charging stations everywhere, you know, that's going to make more people comfortable, I think.
Thank you, Senator Dembrow. And I'll just add, as a full driver of an electric vehicle myself, I can attest that I think once we have a better infrastructure, people are going to be more comfortable driving a full electric vehicle for longer trips. I know I get nervous in mine a little bit if I don't know where the next charging station is. So thank you so much for that. And you can go ahead and continue.
Great. Omar, if you could flip it. Yep, you got it. Omar's doing great duty today because I got a lot of slides. To provide some insight on the progress toward the goals, keeping in mind that we couldn't do an actual forecast, we assessed ZEV sales growth rate needed to achieve the state targets, and then compared this with the growth rate to ZEV market projections from major national studies that were conducted in the last few years. And the market share needed to achieve the 2025 goal of 250,000 ZEVs by 2025 would need to be twice as fast as the most aggressive study forecast. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Omar. I'll just continue while Omar's pulling that up. We do know that ZEV growth is strong in Oregon, while largely ZEV growth is actually flat in the nation. So the Oregon ZEV market share is growing, with about 6.5% of vehicle sales were ZEVs in Oregon in this last year. And Odo also compared the growth rate of our ZEVs to California's proposed market share targets for their Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, and even put their accelerated market share growth rate. With that growth rate, Oregon would not be able to achieve the 2025 and 2030 goals. It's stuck. Interestingly, though, while the 2035 goal, which is to achieve 90% of market share, this may actually be achievable, although more data on ZEV adoption growth is needed to assess this. We know that market share needs to increase dramatically if we want to even come close to those other two goals. So 90% of market share would actually occur pretty easily. And as noted, it is expected that ZEV growth will soon start to grow quickly, and we have some work to do to get ready for this growth. But as a leader in ZEV adoption, the state is well positioned to meet this challenge, as we'll discuss in some later slides, hopefully. Beth, should I just continue?
I think so. Can you maybe just do a check? Omar lost connection. Christy has taken over. So are you looking for slide 11? Is that the right number at this point?
Slide 11, yep.
So Christy, go forward one more, please. This is just, thank you, Christy. We have a backup in the room, so we're good to go. Thank you very much.
You are well prepared. Great. So the next reporting requirement was the carbon intensity of all fuel consumption in Oregon's transportation sector. And this is on a downward trajectory with the largest decreases in the on-road sector. Next slide, please. So you just heard about the Clean Fuels Program from Corey Ann, and this chart shows the effects of clean fuel adoption policies, particularly the Clean Fuels Program. And I just wanted to note, because Senator Finley had a question earlier, and I think this does a really good job of showing the impacts of different programs in the state. So you see that between 2005 and 2008, we had a fairly precipitous drop in our carbon intensity, largely due to state and federal renewable fuel standards. But then we see another drop again in 2015 and 2016, with more heading into 2019. And that was the onset of the Clean Fuels Program in Oregon. And what's interesting is that while the light duty sector alone, so passenger vehicles, you notice are holding kind of steady at the moment, although we know that's going to drop soon, you see that the total carbon intensity has dropped more. And we think that the vast majority of that is the adoption of renewable diesel, which can be just thrown in the tank of any old diesel truck. So we see some of the impacts of the Clean Fuels Program here in this data that we pulled together for the report. And if you want to know more information about this, you can dive into the report on this particular section, but I think Corey covered a lot of it. Next slide, please. So we use those carbon intensities to assess the effects of greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector, and really to look at what those effects would be because of ZEV adoption in the state. And that's our third reporting requirement. Next slide. To assess this, we looked only at tailpipe emissions because this is what the state's greenhouse gas goals are based on. They're the in-boundary emissions. But we did also report on life cycle emissions because it is helpful in understanding the total effects of transportation electrification. Life cycle emissions in Oregon are about 33% more than tailpipe alone on average over the last decade. The transportation sector has comprised 36% of tailpipe emissions for the state over the last decade on average, and it's growing. And light duty emissions are 56% of transportation emissions and about 19% of total emissions. So light duty passenger vehicles comprise about a fifth of our total greenhouse gas emissions. In 2018, light duty vehicle emissions were nearly 20% higher than their proportional share to meet the 2020 state greenhouse gas goals. And ZEV adoption, though still modest, has kept these emissions from being even higher. Over the last decade, ZEV use has avoided an estimated 338,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in Oregon and nearly 470,000 metric tons on a life cycle basis. Next slide, please. The fourth reporting requirement was to assess Oregonians' awareness of ZEV options and benefits. Next slide. Nationally, a recent survey found that 41% of U.S. respondents would prefer an alternative powertrain vehicle, up from 29% a year earlier. While most people have heard of electric vehicles, only about a third of folks know much about them. Next slide, please. While there's no statewide assessment of ZEV awareness, many organizations have conducted surveys, including Portland General Electric and PacifiCorp, who are both conducting regular surveys to assess trends in knowledge of electric vehicles in their territories. Next slide, please. In this survey data from PGE, we see that knowledge of EVs is similar to the national study at about a third of respondents, but note that there is a growth in the very familiar category from 2018 to 2019. Next slide, please. Oh, stay there. I think I'm off one. Can you go back? Thank you. Pacific Power, whose territories include more rural areas of the state, saw a small increase in the likelihood or potential for vehicle buyers who would consider an EV, while the likelihood of purchasing one was relatively the same. Next slide. There's also anecdotal evidence that statewide knowledge of ZEVs may be higher than average because Oregon is often ranked highly in national surveys for ZEV adoption rates, charging infrastructure availability, and supporting programs and policies. We also are ranked third in the nation for EV adoption rates. Next slide. So our next reporting requirement, we reviewed the distribution of zero-emission vehicles by different demographic groups, including rural compared to urban. Next slide. For ZEVs distributed by geographic area, we use 9 different place types as defined by the Oregon Department of Transportation and Department of Land Conservation and Development to inform their transportation planning work, which you can see here. We see relatively low adoption in rural areas, particularly those far from large metropolitan areas. We also see low adoption in city centers where public transit is readily available. The highest level of adoption is in suburban areas at nearly half. This is likely due to several factors, including easier access to vehicle charging in single-family homes and the relative ease of using a ZEV in metropolitan areas where charging infrastructure is more prevalent. Next slide, please. In this map of the Salem area, note that the relative density of ZEVs in the surrounding towns to Salem, such as Albany and Dallas, McMinnville, Canby, which may be supported by the availability of charging in those towns as well as in the nearby cities. So we're seeing a higher amount of growth there. Next slide. And looking at the distribution of ZEVs by county income, we see a very strong correlation between average income by county and ZEV adoption. This likely reflects the historically higher upfront costs for ZEV, coupled with a relatively slim used vehicle market where lower cost options would be available. Next slide, please. For the remainder of the demographic data reviews, we mapped ZEV registration information to U.S. Census block groups. There are 2,634 census block groups in Oregon, and these were the smallest areas that we had sufficient data with which to do comparisons. We don't have owner-specific demographic data, so to assess, for instance, the racial diversity of EV owners, ODO looked at the diversity of each census block group and compared it to the average statewide racial diversity. About 78% of ZEVs are located in areas where racial diversity is less than the statewide average, but about 75% of block groups are less diverse than the statewide average. So there's not significant data to assess if there's any disparity in adoption by race. However, known historical racial inequities have led to lower than average income levels for many racial groups, and income level is strongly correlated with EV adoption. There is much clearer data on adoption by housing type. In Oregon, about 68% of homes are owner occupied, and we see 78% of registered EVs are in areas where home ownership is more prevalent. There is a similar breakout for areas with predominantly more single family homes compared to multi-unit dwellings. In fact, there are twice as many EVs in areas where single family homes make up 75% or more of the housing, and 2/3 of that are in areas where there is only single family housing. Next slide, please. So our next reporting requirement was on ZEV platforms that are available in the sector. We know that ZEV platforms are becoming more widely available, especially in the passenger vehicle sector, and increasingly so in the medium and heavy duty segment, as well as micromobility and non-road equipment. Next slide. Up to this point, we have focused mainly on vehicles in the light duty passenger sector, but there are also electric options becoming more widely available in medium and heavy duty vehicles. These include all vehicles that are used on roads and highways in Oregon, such as school buses, transit buses, delivery vans. Large electric semi-trucks are anticipated maybe this year, maybe next year, with at least 2 manufacturers taking orders for these trucks today. Next slide, please. On-road transportation accounts for the largest amount of energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon, but there are also non-road transportation modes where electric models are available or being tested. In the passenger vehicle sector, perhaps one of the most anticipated electric models is an electric pickup truck. As you can see in the pie charts on the left, pickup trucks make up nearly a quarter of the entire statewide fleet. Manufacturer Rivian began delivering their pickup trucks to customers shortly after this report was published in September, and Ford Motors is taking orders on their F-150 Lightning, which is anticipated to be available next year. It is likely that widespread availability of electric pickups will drive more EV adoption in Oregon, potentially significantly more. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are commercially available in California, but not in Oregon because we don't have the fueling infrastructure in place. But the current models of hydrogen cars are all mid-size sedans, which you can see on this slide. Next slide, please. So micromobility may be the platform with the most widely utilized electric models. Electric micromobility options include e-bikes, e-scooters, e-skateboards, e-cargo bikes, e-one-wheels, and other low-speed transportation options. These can play a critical role for Oregonians, particularly in metropolitan areas, by providing quick transport to and from transit, otherwise known as that last mile. Next slide, please. In the medium and heavy duty segments, the availability of vehicle models is growing rapidly, with electric options available for many of the most commonly used vehicles. Unlike the light duty sector, however, model availability is much more broadly defined because these vehicles are highly customized to meet the needs of different customers. We do see ZEV adoption occurring where vehicles are used for daily round trips that leave from a central depot where charging is available to return to that depot for charging as needed. Vehicles that require long distance travel, especially where publicly available charging infrastructure is required, are generally not in use today. Next slide. One such area where electric vehicles are more widely adopted is transit and school bus fleets. In fact, there are electric formats of transit buses operating in Oregon today in the Eugene-Springfield area, Portland metro area, Wilsonville, and Josephine County, with more expected in the Salem-Keizer area next year. And this year, the first electric school buses hit the road for the Beaverton School District, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. Excuse me, next slide, please. I think that slide was a vestigial piece. There we go. So cost differences between zero emission vehicles. The upfront costs of light duty ZEVs are dropping, and although still more expensive than gasoline counterparts, our state and federal incentives can reduce costs significantly. And in some cases, owning an EV is actually less expensive than owning a similar internal combustion engine, which I'll highlight here in a moment. Next slide, please. So cost of vehicle is often flagged in surveys as a significant barrier to EV adoption. In a set of surveys conducted by PGE in 2018 and 2019, cost and affordability was the most highly cited barrier to adoption and a concern that grew between surveys. Next slide. In this example, you can see that the cost differences vary between models, and where incentives can be applied, upfront costs can be lower. It is important to note, though, that not all incentives are available for all vehicles. The Chevy Bolt, for instance, is no longer eligible for the federal tax credit. Further, incentives offered may not be available at the time of purchase, meaning that buyers must have the means to float those higher costs until they can receive rebate money or use tax credits. As an example, the DEQ Clean Vehicle Rebate Program allows auto dealers to apply for the rebate on behalf of customers and discount the cost of the vehicle at the time of purchase, whereas the federal tax credit savings could take up to a year before being available to the driver. Next slide. When owners have access to electric fuel through their home utility bill, yes, that's right. The cost to fuel the vehicle is significantly cheaper than for gasoline, as much as 4 times less expensive. And because they have many fewer parts and lubricants, EVs also cost less to maintain, with a recent study concluding that both battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric are half the cost of a similar gasoline vehicle. Next slide. So on ODO's website, we have an electric vehicle dashboard, and among other things, you can find information on buying or lease, if you're interested in buying or leasing an EV, that enables you to calculate your fuel savings by providing just some basic information about their current vehicle, driving habits, electricity rates, and the EV that they would like to purchase. And you can see from this example on the screen, it's considerably less to drive an EV than the same internal combustion engine. Next slide. We also looked at the total cost of ownership over 12 years for each of the 4 vehicle types that you can see up here, and found that the cost to own a ZEV in these examples was less than a comparable gasoline vehicle when most or all of the incentives were used. So for each year of ownership, you actually paid less. And the examples that you see here are based on paying about 20% down and financing the remainder of the vehicle costs over 60 months. It's important to note that while these costs are less for new EVs, far more Oregonians purchase used vehicles than new. The Oregon Charge Ahead rebate, which can be used toward the purchase of a new or used EV, is a critical policy to opening access to ZEVs for low and moderate income Oregonians who are looking to buy a less expensive used electric vehicle. Next slide. So the availability and reliability of charging infrastructure was our next reporting requirement. And this gets at the fueling options, providing fueling options for Oregonians, which is an essential component to driving increased electric vehicle adoption, because that fueling infrastructure must be as convenient as gasoline fueling to really see those higher levels of adoption. And to this end, the Oregon Department of Transportation conducted their Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis Study to identify the charging infrastructure needed for Oregon to achieve the ZEV adoption targets that we're talking about here over the next 15 years. And this was a robust assessment of state charging infrastructure gaps, and as such, ODO points to this study to better understand charging needs for the state. But ODO also conducted a public engagement where we received feedback from the public on how the terms availability and reliability could be described and what metrics could be used to assess the state of the electric fueling in Oregon. Next slide, please. Reliability can be thought of as how frequently a charger is in operation when it's not down for maintenance or needing other sorts of things to fix it and make it usable. Whereas availability can refer to whether a charger is available within a geographical area or accessible to all Oregonians. Next slide, please. One of the resources ODO used to provide insight into availability and reliability was the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Management, often referred to as NESCOM. Through the outreach and engagement, NESCOM has provided potential definitions for these terms and metrics to assess them. So for example, availability might include whether a charger is open access or not. And open access refers to the ability for members of one charger network to easily be able to use another charger network if they need to. Availability might also include payment options, such as through a phone app, using a credit card, or calling the company to provide payment information over the phone. Whereas reliability could include the percent of time a specific charger is operational, known as uptime, or how quickly repairs are completed on chargers that are down, or how many redundant charging options are available at a particular site. All of this information can not only be collected, but also included as a specification in contracts when charger companies receive funding for charger installations and management. So this really gets at Senator Finley's being able to measure progress, which we think is really important as well. Next slide. The next reporting requirement directed ODO to assess the overall effects of transportation electrification to electric utilities and the grid. Next slide, please. As a reference, in order for the state to meet its ZEV adoption targets, ODOT's TINA study that I mentioned earlier indicated a 5-fold increase in charging is needed by 2025 and more than 20 times increase by 2030. While this is considerable, it's important to understand what types of loads individual chargers might look like on the grid and how they might affect grid operations. Next slide. Overall grid demand increases anticipated from light-duty vehicle charging is comparable to historical levels of load growth nationally, meaning electric utilities have planned for in the past the amount of generation needed to meet this amount of increased load. It should be noted, though, that this does not include medium and heavy-duty vehicle charging or charging for electric vehicles in other parts of the transportation sector, like non-road vehicles or marine vehicles. We'll address this likely more in future reports as more information and data become available. The effects of EVs on the electric distribution system have more near-term implications for utilities, where multiple EVs charging in the same location and at the same time can affect the capacity of this local electric infrastructure, such as the need to upgrade or increase transformers. To address this, many utilities review where EVs are located on their systems and use this information to plan for necessary distribution system equipment upgrades and replacements. Next slide, please. Utilities can also address this increased local demand by supporting more staggered energy use, as can be seen in this visual from Columbia River People's Utility District, showing customers how spreading out their appliance usage will reduce overall electricity demand. Some utilities are addressing this through education and awareness, establishing time of use rates that incentivize people to charge during lower demand times, or even piloting programs that enable utilities to manage vehicle charging. Next slide, please. Our last reporting requirement asked us to work with the Oregon Department of Transportation to assess the impacts ZEV adoption might have on the funds the state uses to maintain and build roadways. Because ZEVs consume no gasoline or little gasoline in the case of plug-in hybrids, this will have the effect of reducing overall revenues coming into the state highway fund. Next slide. ODOT will be conducting a more in-depth economic analysis of all of this next year, and they'll publish it in October. But as we discussed this with ODOT, they indicated that provisions in the Omnibus Transportation Bill that passed in 2017 has an expected and potential increases in state fuel taxes to help the state highway fund maintain funding levels, even with EV adoption. Next slide. EVs are also not anticipated to have a significant effect on the fund in the near future, mainly because electric vehicles are still a very small proportion of vehicles on the road. And as more EVs sign up for ODOT's Origo program in lieu of the higher EV registration fee, EVs will be contributing to the fund on a more consistent basis, similar to how gasoline and diesel vehicles contribute to the fund through fuel taxes. And Origo is a road mileage use program, so you pay taxes based on how much you drive. Next slide. As you can see in this chart, Odo's analysis showed if 50% of battery electric vehicles were participating in Origo today, the state would have revenues equal to that from the EV registration fee that's currently in place. And at higher Origo participation, revenues increase. Next slide, please. So in addition to these reporting requirements, Senate Bill 1044 included a directive to Odo to develop recommendations if the state was not on track to achieve ZEV adoption goals. Next slide. The intent of these recommendations is to support greater ZEV adoption and enable the state to move toward meeting their adoption goals. First, the recommendations in this report point to the recommendations in ODOT's TINA study, in which Odo participated in a consultant capacity. As vehicles become more prevalent, ready access to electric fuel will become increasingly critical, and the recommendations of that study are very thorough. Next slide. Several other recommendations focus on data collection. Odo's authorities include being the clearinghouse for all energy-related data, and the development of this report, as well as other studies happening at the agency right now, provide objective data and analysis that serves as the backbone for policy development. The first iteration of the BIZAV report was highly focused on light-duty vehicles, where data is more robust, but more information is needed to more fully understand whether all Oregonians have access to electric vehicles and their benefits, as well as understanding what that medium and heavy-duty vehicle future might look like. Because data resources are often available across multiple organizations, Odo recommends that we continue to work with our sister agencies, stakeholders, and members of the public to identify what data resources exist and what options we have to fill data gaps. These data discussions often occur through interagency collaborations, such as the Zero Emission Vehicle Interagency Working Group and the Every Mile Counts initiative. As federal funding in support of ZEVs and ZEV charging seems imminent, continued engagement across all agencies that work to support increased ZEV adoption is even more crucial. And sufficient resources across those agencies to effectively and responsibly support increased ZEV adoption is necessary to ensure that the state continues to make headway on meeting its ZEV goals and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. Thank you for your time to present our work on this report. I'm very happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Michael Dembrow has a question.
Thanks, Chair Leber. Jessica, thank you very much. This is really useful information. I'd like to go back to number 6 on the slides. You don't have to bring it up again. That was just calling for more consistency in definitions and that kind of thing. And, you know, the problem, the challenge of the different charging modes, you know, there's CCS, there's CHAdeMO, I actually don't know how to pronounce that, but, and, you know, I know when the West Coast Electric Highway, the interstate highway effort that has been underway, when it, you know, got started, there wasn't much of the CCS type charger, which now is becoming, you know, more common, certainly among the American companies. I wonder if you could talk about that problem and what we need to do to overcome it and make sure that we have more of those CCS type chargers here in Oregon.
Chair Leber, Vice Chair Finley, Senator Dembrow, great question. You'll be happy to know that the Oregon Department of Transportation is upgrading that West Coast Electric Highway, and all of the charging units on that set of chargers will have CCS now once it's completed. So CCS is becoming a really, it's ubiquitous. CHAdeMO does seem to be going away. One thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of folks who have vehicles that operate on that CHAdeMO platform. And, you know, the West Coast Electric Highway was really designed to help people get up and down I-5, but also provided resources for folks living in more rural, remote parts of the state. And for those folks who might have purchased a vehicle that uses CHAdeMO, ensuring that that CHAdeMO platform is available for a lot longer is really critical. It's about, Oregonians tend to, actually, we don't know how long Oregonians tend to own a car, but we do know that the average age of a vehicle on Oregon's roads is 12 years. So it's clear that people hang on to cars for quite a while. And so those CCS vehicles will be around for a lot longer. And to your point of adopting standardized definitions and metrics, I think this really gets to Senator Finley's point that he's made about you have to set goals, they have to be achievable, and you have to measure them. And right now, to assess the availability and reliability of EV charging infrastructure is challenging and ad hoc in that we worked with people to understand what they thought would be important things to address for this report, but we have no standardized state requirement to assess those chargers against. So I think that is something that we'd be interested in collaborating with stakeholders on and understanding better what those might look like.
Thank you so much. Are there any further questions from the committee? You know, I have a question just about you have your number one goal here is to significantly increase access of electric vehicle charging in Oregon. How do you cite those charging? How do those get cited? What's the process?
Excuse me, Chair Leber, Vice Chair Finley, that is a very good question. And there is no one answer to that. We've seen that several companies have put different approaches together on how they deal with this. It can be very difficult for many reasons. You have to have the appropriate amount of electricity at the site, or it will cost you money to upgrade that electricity. So what we saw was a lot of charging companies made agreements with big box stores so that they would have access to putting in charging infrastructure throughout the nation relatively easily. And that's something that new charging is going to have to figure out. There's a lot of characteristics that people want to see in their charging site. It needs to be somewhere that people feel safe when they're there. So lighting needs to be appropriate and likely not out in the middle of nowhere with no businesses or anything to go to. People need access to food and restrooms while they're at these sites. They need to be able to use multiple platforms. They need options if something's not working. Until we build up the infrastructure appropriately, that is a big concern for folks, that they might be stranded somewhere. So I think that people are, I think that the concern is that we need to sort of sit down and think this through with utilities who are critical to the infrastructure that needs to go in to support the chargers, and look for opportunities that help smooth that process out. I don't know what the answer is to that question. ODOT is going to be leading up some public engagements on that. I believe that ODO has been asked to help lead that with them. But the question will become, what's that key piece? How can we identify something like box stores that we just have that yep, we would like to do this here, and we work through it with them to get it done, rather than sitting through all of the rigmarole of figuring out how to do it, where it needs to go, who's got availability. And last, I'll just say that electricity capacity is really important, and it becomes even more important when you get down into rural areas. And again, now it's becoming even more important because that may be the only charger within a lot of miles that people have access to. So ensuring that it's robust, that it's a large charging system that people are able to count on when they need it is really critical.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about increasing our charging stations so we can increase the number of electric vehicles on the road, making sure that our grid is stable. But I do think that understanding the barriers to the siting of these charging stations are going to be really important as we go forward to try to achieve, especially your goal number 1. Thank you so much for that presentation. We really appreciate it. That's the 53 pages, the longest so far of the day. So you get that prize. And yep, there you go. All right. But next, we're going to move on to a very important topic, the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. And we have a number of people who are going to be talking to you about this, but I'd like to turn the introduction of this over to my colleague, Senator Dembrow, to introduce this to us.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for having this on the agenda. I know it was going to be on the September agenda, which then got rolled over. I want to really thank Beth Riley for her support in getting this presentation set up, and Yumei Wang, who is going to be leading the presentation. Just as a kind of background, some of you know that, and you'll be hearing more about this, that nearly all of Oregon's refined fuel comes into the state, and through through either pipe or barge, or truck, and is then stored next to the Willamette River for further distribution. Which is very efficient, but it also creates a huge potential hazard because the ground on which those tanks are located is very vulnerable to disturbance and liquefaction, even if a big earthquake happens. And this is a problem that we've known about for a while, and have, I think, really put off dealing with. We're talking about, repercussions of a catastrophic nature, and we know it's coming, and we know that we have to take steps to deal with it. And the way to address that is, first of all, to make people understand that this problem exists, and that's a big part of today's hearing, but also to start taking some steps legislatively to address it. And we will have a bill in the short session. It's one of my personal bills to address this. will just say in passing that one of the pleasures for me this summer has been hiking in Forest Park on a regular basis with my daughter. It's been a great opportunity for us to catch up. And it's really been great. But the downside is that, every week I was going by the tanks there on the side of the Willamette and just reminded of, this is something that we, as legislators, as the state, as people who focus on emergency preparedness, really need to be working on. And so, hence that bill and this presentation. So I'll turn it over to Yume. I really want to thank her for organizing this and for her work on this. And she'll tell you about her background and why she's so useful in this effort. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Of course.
Good morning, Chair Lemer, Vice Chair Finley, and members of the committee. My name is Yume Wong, and I'll be the first speaker to discuss Oregon's Energy Resilience Challenge and describe the potential disaster that we face at the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, the CEI Hub, and I'll be echoing Senator Dembrow's introductory comments. I'm an advisor at Portland State, and until last year, I was an engineer at Dogami for 26 years. Next slide, please. Thank you. In my testimony, I'll start off with some background information that is contained in a seminal report issued by Dogami in 2013. And in the report, all natural hazards that could affect Oregon's energy sector were evaluated. Then the report focused on identifying the very real threat from a Cascadia earthquake to Oregon's CEI hub. And it's clear from the Dogami report, as well as the many studies done since that time, that there's a pressing need for improved safety at the CEI hub and a disaster resilience plan that specifically addresses petroleum fuel storage and its availability in communities across the state. So you might ask, why? It's very commonplace to have fuel shortages in disasters. After every earthquake disaster that I've investigated, there's been a fuel shortage. And this includes the 2011 Japan disaster with the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. I was the lead investigator on our team of the fuel sector. Electricity went out, there's not enough fuel.
Ms. Wang, before you go on, you're a little bit muddled, and I'm wondering if it might be your your earpieces. It might be better to take them out and see whether we can hear you just a little bit better.
Thank you for mentioning that. Is this any better?
Not much. It just seems a little wobbly.
I just plugged them back in. Does that make any difference?
No.
Any IT folks have suggestions?
I'm wondering if you can hold, if it might be better to hold the microphone up to your, it might be a little awkward, but to see if that.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead and speak. Is that any better?
Does this sound better?
Not really. Okay.
Madam Chair, would you like me to have, we can also do a phone call-in option if that would be better for sound. So I can re-email you the phone number, or it's on the link I sent you, and then you can mute your computer and talk through the phone microphone. That might be the best option.
Yeah, that would be really, let's do that. It's too important of a topic for us not to be able to hear it.
Okay. Let's see.
So just resent it in case you don't have it readily available.
Beth, it's asking me if I, oh, okay, this might be connecting. Okay.
Okay, can you hear
Yes,
me?
excellent.
That's perfect.
Okay. Ooh, and I have this echo that I'm going to try to not listen to myself. Okay. Can you give me a thumbs up, Beth? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. In my testimony, I'm going to start off with some background information that's contained in a seminal report issued by Dogami in 2013. And in that report, all natural hazards that could affect Oregon's energy sector were evaluated. Then the report focused on identifying a very real threat from the Cascadia earthquake to Oregon's CEI hub. And it's clear from the Dogami report, as well as the studies done since that time, that there's a pressing need to improve the safety at the CEI hub and to have a disaster resilience plan that specifically addresses petroleum fuel storage and its availability in communities across the state. And the reason why is because fuel shortages are commonplace during disasters. After every disaster that I've investigated, there's been a fuel shortage, and this includes the 2011 Japan disaster with the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. I was the lead investigator on our team of the fuel shortage of the fuel sector, and electricity went out. There wasn't enough fuel. So fuel should be stored at strategic locations across the state before a Cascadia earthquake strikes, because our bulk fuel terminals at the CEI hub will not be receiving fuel, and our highways will be broken, so transporting bulk fuel into communities will be challenging and slow. And I'd like to again thank Senator Dembrow and Beth for extending this opportunity. You'll be hearing testimony from various expert stakeholders, and you'll hear information that suggests that there's a need for more state leadership to improve the safety at the CEI hub and to ensure that communities have more fuel supplies in the immediate aftermath of disasters. Next slide, please. In my testimony, let's see. The lineup of speakers will include professional experts with deep knowledge and experience on the CEI hub. The first three are professionals who focus on preparing and responding to disasters. It will be Deanna Henry from Odo, who focuses on fuel planning during disasters. Then Andrew Phelps, who directs OEM and works with everybody in the state on disaster preparedness and response. Jonna Papaefthimiou, the Chief Resilience Officer and Interim Director of the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, and she'll discuss Portland's efforts and concerns. Alex Lopez will be next, and he'll represent the NAACP CEI Hub Subcommittee and express concerns about our people. And last, Allison Pyrch is engineer with post-disaster investigation experience and an industry expert. So this panel of very well-informed speakers will share their expertise with you. Next slide. So as you know, The Cascadia earthquake is a serious threat. It's one that will find our weakest ground and most vulnerable infrastructure and will wreak havoc at a scale that we aren't ready for. There's a New Yorker article titled The Really Big One that describes the massive 600-mile long fault that has triggered earthquakes and will again shake the Pacific Northwest. And you can see an image of the fault on this slide. Next slide, please. So turning to the energy sector, you know very well society relies on energy very heavily. And in 2013, Dogami completed a study together with Odo and the Oregon PUC that covers fuel, natural gas, and electricity. And this study identified facilities of statewide importance that are all clustered together in this area that we termed the CEI hub. So this is the report cover that shows the CEI hub along the Willamette River, and it's flanked, the Willamette River is flanked in red, which are soils that are extremely vulnerable to liquefy, to fail in earthquakes. And after storms and fires, we use a lot of fuel to respond, fuel for search and rescue, for operating planes and heavy equipment. We need fuel for transporting supplies, backup electricity, to run emergency generators, and for shelters and water treatment plants and so on. Next slide, please. The CEI hub is located just downtown, downstream from downtown Portland. Next slide, please. Maybe it's on its way. And in the slide, you'll be able to see this. It should be back one. Yep, here we go. So the CEI hub is shown in yellow at the top center of the slide. It's located on the lower Willamette River. It's a 6-mile stretch that extends from the Fremont Bridge to Sawby's Island and includes petroleum fuel terminals, natural gas, and electricity facilities, and the entire area is susceptible to liquefaction, where the ground can temporarily turn into a liquid like quicksand. And the structures built on the soil near the river will likely experience heavy damage in an earthquake. Next slide, please. Important structures like this are right on the riverbank. Like other parts of Oregon, some of the structures are over 100 years old. But the biggest overarching problem here is that all of Oregon's fuel terminals are built here on this highly problematic soil. And the petroleum fuel, for us, all of our eggs are in one basket, and there's very little flexibility in the normal fuel delivery system. So I should mention that the middle slide is a LNG tank, and those are some high voltage electricity crossings in the CEI hub on the right. Next slide, please. The CEI facilities are all built on what used to be the bottom of the Willamette River. The river sediments were suctioned up and then sprayed along the side of the Portland West Hills to create new land. And so these facilities are built on hydraulic fill, and hydraulic fill is extremely susceptible to liquefaction. Next slide, please. The shaking and liquefaction can cause damage to towers, to transformers like you see here in the middle, and other equipment, tanks. And as a result of our 2013 energy project, the good news is that there's seismic safety regulation on the natural gas and electricity suppliers in the state. So these facilities are addressing liquefaction and seismic safety concerns. And I just wanted to point out on the right is a photo of me. It's one that Allison Pyrch took in Japan in 2011. And before the earthquake, that tank was underground. And because of liquefaction, it popped up out of the ground. Next slide, please. So The bad news is that despite Dogami's 2013 report recommendations and the profound safety problems in this area, there are still no requirements on seismic safety for the bulk petroleum fuel terminals. I performed on-site inspections of all of the fuel terminals here and found that many of the structures that we in the state rely on are incredibly outdated and defective. Oregon imports over 90% of our fuel from Washington state to this area, and our delivery system is exposed to extreme hazards and relies on a variety of defective infrastructure. Next slide, please. So when a Cascadia earthquake shakes, there will be failure of tanks and pipes, and not just in the CEI hub, but also to the fuel delivery system. There's a 1960s transmission pipe from Washington refineries to the CEI hub, and the owner of the pipeline expects over 300 breaks in a Cascadia earthquake. The Columbia River shipping channel will not be passable, and this is due to the expected tsunami damage right at the river mouth, as well as other blockages along the river from downed bridges and electrical lines and pipelines and so forth. Next slide, please. So just taking a look at one example, the center photo here is a fuel pier in the CEI hub. And on the left side, take a look at that skinny little connection connecting that footing on loose sand that is connecting it to a timber that's split and the whole thing is leaning. This is bad. And this pier could likely fail due to liquefaction in the same style that this fishing pier in Chile failed in an earthquake in 2010. The soils can move out and the whole thing can kind of crunch up accordion style. Next slide, please. So we should be expecting explosions, fires, toxic fumes. Fires could spread to Forest Park in the Portland West Hills. A lot of trees could burn. Depending on wind conditions, there could be raging fires. So life safety is a very real concern. Next slide, please. And it's not just the spills that could harm the environment. It could take months to clean up. A fuel shortage would hamper response activities across the state of Oregon, and this would cost lives. Fuel is needed for fire trucks to inspect bridges, roads, electrical lines, gas lines, for emergency generators at hospitals. So as society shifts our reliance away from petroleum, we also need to ensure that our own safety and security will be met with adequate fuel supplies for response, recovery, and rebuilding in Oregon. Last slide, please. To finish up, the CEA hub is a very high-risk situation with statewide impacts that requires legislative leadership. I leave you with this list of resources. And with that, I'm pleased that next you'll be hearing from a slate of expert panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that informative discussion around, I don't know who's going to go next. Is it Ms. Henry? Terrific. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Henry, and whoever is after Ms. Henry, just please to make sure that you introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then continue on with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Lemer, Vice Chair Finley, and members of the committee. My name is Deanna Henry, and I am the Emergency Preparedness Manager for the Oregon Department of Energy. And it is ODO's responsibility to ensure that even in a worst-case disaster, we have strategies in place to provide adequate fuel supplies to support the state's overall response and recovery activities. And you may want accurately describe our statewide fuel vulnerabilities. As reported in the 2013 Dogami study, which our agency funded, we can expect to lose more than 90% of our normal incoming statewide fuel supply, with no way to resupply, with the refineries in Washington State and the Olympic pipeline offline for months due to earthquake impacts. And so to address our serious statewide fuel vulnerabilities, our agency did develop the Oregon Fuel Action Plan, which identifies key actions that our agency would take to bring fuel into the state should the CEI hub be compromised and the Cascadia event happens tomorrow. And so our strategies include bringing and establishing new supply chains into the state. And in August of this year, we exercised these strategies with our federal and military partners. We worked through coordination and the logistics requirements needed to bring fuel into the state by truck, by air, by rail, as well as over the shore along the Oregon coastline in a post-Cascadia environment. And the exercise validated two challenges for us. The first is that the fuel coming into Oregon from FEMA will not be enough to meet our needs, at least initially, considering that the Cascadia earthquake does impact the state of Washington, likely California and British Columbia. So this is similar to what we experienced with COVID and the PPE demands, only worse because of the earthquake impacts to critical infrastructure. However, within weeks, we can expect sufficient supplies arriving in Oregon, primarily to supply bases at the Redmond Airport and Kingsley Field in Klamath Falls. The exercise also confirmed for us that the difficulty is not bringing fuel into Oregon, it's getting that fuel to the impacted communities in Western Oregon, with widespread damage to our highway systems, to the thousands of bridges, creating islands of isolated populations west of the I-5 corridor all the way to the coast. It could take weeks for us to get fuel to some of these communities due to the lack of access, and even longer in some of the more remote parts of the state. And so our recent wildfire season showed us that we really don't need a catastrophic earthquake for our region to experience fuel limitations. In early summer of this year, there was a sudden increase in commercial air travel coupled with an early wildfire season, which created a supply and distribution problem. And with the exception of the Portland International Airport that receives jet fuel by pipeline from the CEI hub, all other jet fuel deliveries are made by truck, primarily from the CEI hub to airports around the state. So getting jet fuel delivered to Eastern and Southern Oregon from the CEI hub early on in the season proved very challenging. And these were airports that were supporting the wildfire response. And so because of the ongoing limitations with fuel drivers and trucks, distributors were already working at full capacity, and they were unable to quickly add deliveries to meet our jet fuel demands for airports. And in addition, many of these airports have limited storage capacity on site, and they were unable to take a full truckload of fuel, about 10,000 gallons. And so struggling to meet their normal delivery schedules, fuel distributors were hesitant to dispatch a truck and a driver all the way down to Eastern or Southern Oregon for just a half a load of fuel, because that would take one of their trucks and drivers away from their normal established schedules. So fortunately, the good news is we were able to work with the fuel companies and the airports to coordinate sharing of fuel loads. So we were able to resolve the issue in a relatively short time frame. So that's just one example of our fuel limitations. Fortunately, a lot of work has already been done to identify mitigation measures that could increase our fuel resilience in the state, like the 2013 Dogami study, as well as the 2019 OSPAC report. The OSPAC report recommended that we develop a long-term program to increase the geographic diversity of storage capacity throughout the state, so that we are less reliant on the CEI hub and that just-in-time fuel delivery system. So the goal in increasing fuel storage throughout the state is that we would create a safety network for local communities. It could bridge that gap between a community running out of fuel while allowing the state to bring in outside resources to resupply that impacted area. And this is just one of the initial steps that could improve our fuel resilience and fuel security in a Cascadia event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I believe Senator Finley has a question. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, and thank you so much for your example. I was involved with that example involving fuel in South Central Oregon for support of wildfire issues. But I guess I'm dismayed. Is there mitigation discussions with reasonable options? I mean, a lot of this fuel can't sit forever. It must be utilized and turned over. We haven't developed the storage capability in the tank farms and others in the east side of the state, like it's been recommended for the last 10 years. Are we talking, have we come up with some reasonable mitigation measures to lay out and do? Or are we just continuing to do a report? Or I guess this is a very technical and a tough situation and not a cheap situation. And it's not a public-private partnership in some regards. So it's tough to ask the private industry to go spend millions of dollars to bring up the storage capability for a product that will go bad over time. So where are we at with this?
You know, the OSPAC report did suggest a number of options. We could work with entities like ODOT, who has district offices and maintenance yards around the state, that we could share and support the local communities by increasing one tank. Or we also have options with the OSPAC report of partnering with utilities who would be a part of our emergency response system and strategies, and to rotate that fuel. That is a part of the study and the assessment that would need to be done to see what locations could be strategic and what locations could be supported by increasing fuel capacity in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. If there's no further questions, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Phelps.
Thank you, Chair Lemer, Vice Chair Finley, members of the committee. My name is Andrew Phelps, and I serve as the Director of the Oregon Office of Emergency Management. And I'm going to continue the discussion this morning about rainbows and unicorns and other wonderful, uplifting topics. Emergency management really is about two things: reducing risk and managing consequences. Everything we do really falls underneath those two headings. When we talk about the consequences of a catastrophic failure following a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake in the CEI hub, there are certainly the life safety and the environmental impacts. There are the liquid fuel accessibility impacts that Ms. Henry so eloquently explained. This fuel hub adds complexity to an already long and complex list of challenges Oregon will have accessing resources to help those that are impacted by destroyed infrastructure. And in many ways, it highlights the interdependency of energy, communications, and transportation infrastructure and the reliance on one to reestablish the other. Cascadia and the scenario surrounding a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake provides one of the most challenging consequence management scenarios there is. I will also add that reducing our shared risk from a Cascadia subduction zone event is equally challenging. I want to talk a little bit this morning about ways to reduce our risk from a potential failure of the fuel hub following a Cascadia earthquake. During the 2019 legislative session, House Bill 5050 provided $300,000 for OEM to commission a study to evaluate hazard mitigation and risk reduction options and strategies at the hub. This study, however, was not intended to necessarily look at ways to mitigate against the loss of product from the tanks, but rather assuming the tanks fail during a major seismic event, how can we mitigate against the worst the worst environmental disaster the Pacific Northwest has ever faced. This, of course, would be on top of what is expected to be the most catastrophic disaster in our nation's history. OEM and the State Resilience Officer, as well as several partner agencies, began working with Portland State University on this study in 2019, and the study was completed this past June. To Senator Finley's point, a lot of studies, a lot of engineering reviews, a lot of human impact and environmental impact studies have been done on the CEI hub. And I think it speaks to the complexity around mitigating not just the impacts of loss of fuel at the facility, but ways to avoid an environmental catastrophe should we lose the tens or hundreds of millions of gallons of fuel from that CEI hub. The CEI hub post-product release mitigation strategies identified in the study from PSU. This conversation will actually be fairly brief because there are not a lot of options here. The study recommends looking at continued use of secondary containment like dikes, berms, containment walls, etc., as the best bet to reduce the impact of any spill. However, these existing structures are unlikely to withstand the lateral movement of a large magnitude earthquake. Also, in almost half of the facility lots at the hub, the secondary containment barriers are less than a football field's length away from the edge of the Willamette River. We can look at things like cement deep soil mixing, CDSM, or jet grouting, which is essentially hardening the soil to make it less prone to liquefaction and the impacts of that lateral movement. We can also look at response. Required plans are in place to respond to a spill at the CEI hub. However, these plans are predicated on access. And we know that access anywhere west of the Cascades will be problematic following a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. As a part of a series of exercises planned for FEMA's national level exercise in 2022, the Coast Guard and the Environmental Protection Agency will be conducting a drill to test their ability to carry out a spill of national significance, or SONS, operation following a Cascadia earthquake and the subsequent release from the hub. Certainly more to come about what the Coast Guard and the EPA learn about the challenges of responding to any hazardous materials release following a Cascadia earthquake, let alone one of the magnitude that could be expected from that CEI hub. So the long and short of it is we need to certainly diversify our fuel storage, understanding, of course, that fuel has a shelf life, but there are certainly ways we can be smart about utilizing other storage capacity around the state, new storage capacity around the state to effectively diversify how we're using an expendable resource and a resource with a shelf life like the various fuels that are stored at the CEI hub. With that, this concludes my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you so much. It looks like Vice Chair Finley has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Phelps. I appreciate it. My question is how many reports have been commissioned in the last few years on this topic? And who in the state of Oregon is responsible for bringing the key findings together and doing anything about any of it?
Chair Lemer, Senator Finley, I know the next speaker from Portland Bureau of Emergency Management has a wonderful slide that actually articulates some of the studies that have been conducted over the last 7 or 8 years. I would say that there's been, I don't know, maybe a dozen since 2012 on the CEI hub. There's a lot of jurisdictional challenges around regulating the CEI hub. Different state agencies have different roles and responsibilities. And to your earlier point, Senator, about the public-private partnership, this is going to take a whole community approach. It's going to take community groups. It's going to take cities, counties, the state, federal governments, and certainly the private sector, the fuel providers, and those responsible for storing the fuel to have some hard conversations, to make some significant investments to reduce this risk. With the impending disaster of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, never has there been something that's been more clear that disasters are not natural. Disasters are policy issues. They are about how we build and where we build and the investments we choose or don't choose to make. These are pretty tough policy questions, but I am confident that the folks that we've got gathered around the table metaphorically speaking, leadership through the governor's office, the state's resilience officer, our academic partners at Portland State and other universities, and of course, the investments made by the appropriators in our state, we can address this issue in partnership with the private sector.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. I'm going to try it, Papaefthimiou, to continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. And for saying my name, folks often don't even try. I appreciate it. And it was correct. My name is Jonna Papaefthimiou, and I am the Chief Resilience Officer at the City of Portland. I'm also the Interim Director at the Bureau of Emergency Management and stuck with that job at least for a few more weeks until I can hire a new boss and focus my efforts on, in large part, on what I'm about to talk to you today, which is about the CEI hub risks. Next slide, please. Thanks. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I think other speakers, engineers who are very knowledgeable, have already highlighted the risks that are here. But I think we all see that this is very fragile infrastructure that's critical to our day-to-day lives and to emergency response. It's very fragile and it's located on quite unstable soils. Some other characteristics that are of concern to us at the City of Portland is that it is also located in a residential neighborhood with hundreds of people that live very near to these tanks. It's also next to Forest Park, which is the largest forested park in the United States, and it has its great wildfire risk, which is something we also concern ourselves with. And most of those neighborhood streets dead end in the park, and it has just one road in and one road out, which is State Highway 30. And so it also has those factors of difficult access and secondary risks that accrue to the hub. Next slide, please. So also, as others have said, there's a statewide risk here, but it's also a risk that's of a grave concern and to Portland residents, and something that as a local jurisdiction we're very aware of. And for that reason, we are using the resources and authorities that we have as a local jurisdiction to attempt to address the risk as we can. Our first resource is our first responders. The Portland Fire and Rescue would be the first ones on the scene of a hazardous materials incident, a spill, or a fire in the CEI hub. They plan and train to respond to those types of events every year in partnership with mutual aid agencies. They do annual drills and exercises with the owner operators there. And they do it absolutely with the knowledge that responding to a catastrophic industrial accident, it would be difficult for a municipal fire department in the best of times, and to do so in the middle of the worst earthquake that the west coast of North America has ever seen would be doubly challenging. But we owe it to our residents to, to do our best to use the resources that we have and to assure them that we're using all that we can to keep them safe. So we take that seriously, and that is for sure our first line of defense. Another power we have as a local jurisdiction is land use and zoning. And for that reason, in 2016, we adopted what we believe at the time was novel land use regulations within the entire United States to prohibit the expansion of the tank farm, just kind of following on the theory of when you're in a hole, stop digging. And so the tank farm cannot expand because of zoning protections that the City of Portland has put in place. Those were not popular entirely with the business community, as you might anticipate, and we have expended a great deal of time and treasure. We have literally been in court since 2016 to defend fossil fuel zoning. We are at the moment seeming to prevail in court, and so and our intention is to continue to vigorously defend it. But this is an authority that accrues to local jurisdictions, and that we feel like we're using to our best advantage to prevent the expansion of the tank farms. The other authority that's solidly with local jurisdictions is building code and permitting authority. And we also have used that to increase safety and reduce risk in the CEI hub. Although we continue to be disappointed that the State Buildings Code Division has not adopted the International Building Code regulations for tanks and doesn't enforce them at the state level, we have taken the initiative to adopt the IBC for tanks locally, and we do enforce it. And so we have safety standards for tanks beyond what's required by the state of Oregon. And we, again, spend money and have permitting authority and inspectors that are knowledgeable of those to ensure that we are enforcing the state of practice regulations for the tanks. We also have used our land powers to deny a compatibility statement for Zenith, which is like a transloading facility for crude oil that wanted to build in the CEI hub. And we, again, somewhat to the chagrin of the business community and at legal cost for us, denied their permits and prevented their expansion. And similarly, you may remember, we denied an expansion of LNG tanks for Pembina a few years ago. So we've really felt like we've done what we can to protect ourselves from the expansion of hazardous fuel industries and to enforce existing safety regulations on the tanks that are there. Next slide, please. The other way that we've attempted to practice self-help is to try and get more data, and that would help us develop new solutions or solve problems there. So certainly, yes, there have been a lot of studies. Senator Finley and I personally have paid for at least 4 of them, which I'm going to share with you today a little bit. The first one was in 2016. It was a part of our hazard mitigation plan for the city. It was funded by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and it was a focus study to develop mitigation concepts for the CEI hub. We did several community meetings with the owner operators there. We explained our intentions. We asked for their best ideas for mitigation, and we asked them to provide information that would help us model the risks. And we set up a third party, sort of safe for data, that was managed by our consultant Tetra Tech, and signed all these non-disclosure agreements to see if folks would share some more information to help us plan. And we failed to obtain any information from owner operators around the tanks. And so it's, I think, still has some good concepts in it, but we were not successful there because we just saw we did not have trust from the owner operators. So then, perhaps somewhat hopefully, we embarked on a new study in partnership with Oregon Solutions that was exploring whether we could do a collaborative policymaking process to regulate the CEI hub jointly with the owner operators. We, again, paid Oregon Solutions probably not enough money because it took them almost 2 years to get all the interviews and get through the study. But at the end, their primary conclusion was that there was a lot of ideas, but there was no support on the part of industry for collaborative policymaking. And so it was not worthwhile for them to continue to pursue work with us on the CEI hub because we just didn't have a partner on the other side of the table, which was disappointing to say the least. So then we took a new tack and we partnered with Portland State University and Dr. Peter Dusica, the same person who's done some work for the State Office of Emergency Management now. And we developed what we believe is a complete inventory of the tanks and their contents based on publicly accessible information from the state fire marshal and from building code data. So in 2019, we published a study that just said, okay, so here's our best guess of what we think is there in the CEI hub, and we invited industry to respond to that to refine the data. Again, we didn't hear anything, but so now we were on to study number 4, which I think I'm hopeful is going to be the most helpful to us because it builds on the work that we've done so far. But what it is intended to do is estimate the economic impacts of a catastrophic spill. We are midway through that study. We published a draft, not with the dollar amount, but just with the amount of oil that we expected to, or fuel that we expected to go to spill into the environment. Here, the expected release that was modeled by Eco Northwest was 94 to 194 million gallons, which is a big range. But even at the low end, that is an incredibly enormous spill. That is bigger than Exxon Valdez, and that is rivaling Deepwater Horizon, which is the largest oil spill in the history of the United States, and also spilled into the Gulf of Mexico, which is a lot bigger than the Willamette River, to say the least. We're expecting to get a dollar amount for damages for cleanup for this sometime before the end of the year, and our hope is that it may also prompt the conversation forward. We keep getting stuck on the fact that retrofits are so expensive, and I'm confident this study is going to show that not retrofitting is also going to be very expensive. So where that leads us to, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. First, I see a question.
Yep. Vice Chair Finley has got a question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Lemer. Thanks for the information. Maybe I'm missing something. Is the whole thrust of these studies and efforts to mitigate the cleanup damage or the spill, and not on resiliency to keep the product flowing and other solutions? Is it all on the effects of a spill?
Good question. right now, well, where our focus is, right, we kind of come full circle. Let me say, we started out saying, let's partner with industry to say, what can we do to improve the resilience of the CEI hub, which would reduce risks for them and for us, and would keep product flowing, which is economically good for them and for us also. We didn't get engagement on that part, and so we've come all the way around to now doing an economic study which demonstrates like the humongous costs of allowing this spill to occur. My hope is that that is going to prompt some investment, but I think maybe your point, which I completely agree with, is an investment that just stops bad things from happening but doesn't provide any benefit and doesn't increase the access to fuel post incident. It's kind of it's only half a solution, right? Like it would be really a missed opportunity to invest in the CEI hub and to not come out at the end with I mean, I strongly feel what we need as a city, but also as a state, is a vision for a new CEI hub that is more resilient, more green, more set up to accept or to accommodate clean fuels or biofuels, that's probably smaller, and that also I think Portland needs a vision for what's in the CEI hub besides a giant brownfield at the end of the story. So I agree. I think we need a vision for going forward. But right now we're just saying, look, this is so expensive, we have to do something.
Thank you for that. Senator Dembrow.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Madam Chair. You know, I think that, you know, one of the purposes of any legislation that we might pursue needs to be, you know, ways to get industry to the table on this. You know, I think we can't find a solution until we really understand the magnitude of the problem, you know, have an understanding of, you know, what the risk is for each of those tanks and, you know, the surface around them. And so that's, you know, part of the purpose of today's hearing is to get a kind of global sense of the problem and then craft legislation that'll put us on a path to get, you know, solutions, buy-in, ongoing work. This is not going to be solved overnight, obviously, but we have to move onto a trajectory of action. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for that. Is it, do you have more on your presentation?
You know, I think that that probably brings us just to the right stopping point, which is to say that as the local jurisdiction, it's a statewide problem, but it's very specific to us also, that we've used our authorities in the building code and land use, but the state has powers that are not delegated to cities. And so we want to provide all the information and problem solving that we've done and be a good problem or good problem solving partner. But that we and the county has been really close with us and helped fund these studies. And together we want to be good partners with the state to resolve this problem, which is really a state and regional problem.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I see that we have two more speakers, and I just want to remind our speakers as we're coming up that we do end at 10:30. So I don't know who is going next. Is it Alex Lopez?
Yeah, I believe it is me. Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Chair Lemer, Vice Chair Finley, Senator Dembrow, and the rest of the committee for convening this informational session on seismic resiliency in the CEI hub in Portland. My name is Alex Lopez, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Portland NAACP CEI hub and seismic risk subcommittee. I'm also a state of Oregon registered geologist with over 15 years of experience in environmental remediation work in Oregon, as well as a social worker with experience assisting communities identify and address environmental issues. NAACP is here today to express its concern about the impacts of the expected Cascadia subduction zone earthquake on the communities in North and Northeast Portland, and to ask for more state leadership to ensure that those communities that are often left behind in planning decisions are adequately protected from the effects of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. In my career, I've seen firsthand how the aging infrastructure in the CEI hub impacts the river and how those impacts flow literally and figuratively downstream, often impacting already marginalized communities and community members. In one of my first positions as a field geologist in Oregon, I performed regular groundwater monitoring at different facilities within the CEI hub. With my own hands, I have removed gallons of gasoline from groundwater wells immediately adjacent to the riverbank. I've also been called to respond to releases and have been that guy out there in the rain throwing out absorbent booms to contain the petroleum sheen flowing from the leaking infrastructure into the river. This is the state of the CEI hub today, and this is prior to the expected Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. The impacts from shaking and liquefaction on that crumbling infrastructure will be devastating, leading to millions of gallons of petroleum being released into the water, soil, and air of nearby and downriver communities. And just as an aside, I'd also like to add that while we're talking today specifically about the CEI hub in Portland, aging petroleum tanks and infrastructure are also a problem that exists throughout the state. As a social worker with experience assisting marginalized communities respond to environmental problems, I've worked with community members around and downriver of the CEI hub. These communities, including historically African American communities, as well as some of the most racially, culturally, and socioeconomically diverse neighborhoods in Portland, often refer to themselves and their neighborhoods as sacrifice zones due to the proximity of the CEI hub, the legacy contamination of the Portland Harbor Superfund site, and the persistent presence of industrial facilities in the north reach of the Willamette River. These communities already expect to bear the brunt of the impacts of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And with the present state of the CEI hub infrastructure, I don't necessarily think they're wrong. I ask you to please think about these communities that are in close proximity to the CEI hub as you consider measures for seismic resiliency. NAACP encourages the committee to accept the recommendations of the OSPAC report. Of particular importance is assigning regulatory oversight of the liquid fuel facilities in the CEI hub to the Department of Environmental Quality. NAACP also supports the implementation of the Shake Alert system at the CEI hub, the funding of studies to advance earthquake resiliency planning, and increase funding to the State Fire Marshal to enhance its ability to respond to land and water-based fuel spills in the CEI hub. In light of our evolving understanding of the risks to the community from the fuel stored at the CEI hub, NAACP asks that this subcommittee help the communities of North and Northeast Portland protect themselves against the worst outcomes of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm going to now turn it over to our last speaker of the day, Allison. Is it Pyrch?
Yes, it's Pyrch. Thank you. Thank you to the committee for letting us be here today. Since I'm the last one, nothing I'm going to say is going to contradict any of my other colleagues, and I don't think any of it is specifically new. I'm a geotechnical engineer that's been practicing in Oregon for 20 years. And for the last 10, 11, 12 years, I've been working specifically on resilience issues here in the state. One of the things that I have done is trying to bridge the gap between public works and emergency management. And fuel systems is one of the places where those things come together very well. I was with UME in both Chile and Japan in two places where their fuel infrastructure is actually fairly well prepared and they had really minor damage. And yet we heard in both places that the inability to get fuel and get enough fuel meant that their recovery was hindered. And so I think we've talked a lot about the fact that we need the fuel for emergency response, but then we also just needed to get our economy back up and running. One of those things from an engineering standpoint is we know that engineers need to make the emergency response time be reduced. So that's really our goal, is to mitigate those risks and mean that our response is an easy thing. We're back up and running in a couple of weeks, and fuel is the number one thing that we need to do that. So I worked on the study that Jonna just talked about when we looked at looking at how much fuel could potentially be spilled into the Willamette River. Based on all of that experience, as well as what we've seen, I think the two really main ideas are we need to diversify our fuel storage as much as possible around the state, and it needs to be resilient around the state. I've also worked with airports and other places to look at resiliency in general. We're really good at not having flexible connections, not having tanks that are anchored, et cetera. So we need to have resilient fuel storage in all areas of the state so that we have redundancy, because we know our transportation system is going to be hurt after a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And then second, the engineering is there. We can do it. It is possible to make this tank in this area resilient and safer for the public. That said, they are probably going to need to be required to do so in order to make it happen. So this legislation moving forward is one of the better things that could happen for both the safety as well as the resiliency and the recovery. Our goal is really, as engineers, is to make sure that our recovery as quickly as possible, and Oregon remains the Oregon that we love and like to live in. So building resilient infrastructure is one of those most important things. So hopefully that was I summarized a little bit. Hopefully that got all the points in there.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We have time for one last question if anybody has one. And it doesn't look like it. So I just want to thank everybody for this. This was a very informative and I will dare say sobering discussion around this topic. The OSPAC report that people have referred to is in our meeting materials, and if anybody wants to refer to that, I would just encourage you to go look at that. It is posted on OLIS. And with that, I believe we've even made it on time. Thank you, everybody who has testified today and who's listening in, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.